They thought she was just another woman standing on the sidelines, quiet, forgettable, maybe a sister or a girlfriend of one of the trainees, certainly not someone who belonged. "Ma'am, this area is restricted. You'll need to step back behind the barrier." The voice belonged to a young lieutenant, barely in his 30s, clean-cut, full of command he hadn't earned yet. He pointed toward the marked visitor zone behind a rope line near the edge of the training field. The woman looked up, offered a polite nod, and took one small step back. She didn't say a word. Her name was Caroline Maddox, mid-30s, slight frame, shoulder-length brown hair tucked behind her ears. No insignias, no military gear, just a windbreaker, a pair of sunglasses, and a quiet kind of presence that somehow felt deliberate. She had come that day to watch her younger brother, Eli Maddox, attempt his first sniper qualification test. That was it. She hadn't announced herself, hadn't made a fuss. She just stood there, watching. But even stillness can provoke suspicion in places where hierarchy matters more than intuition. "Probably thinks she's watching a movie," one recruit muttered to another, loud enough for her to hear. "These civilians always think SEAL training is some kind of reality show." Caroline didn't flinch. She adjusted her sleeves, clasped her hands in front of her, and continued watching as Eli struggled to position his Barrett M82 rifle. His hands shook. The instructors were growing visibly annoyed. Another officer approached, this one older, more seasoned, but no more welcoming. "Civilian observation isn't allowed during active drills, ma'am," he said curtly. "You'll need to wait in the parking lot." "I understand," she said gently. "I'm just here for my brother." "Which recruit?" "Eli Maddox. He's the one with the—" She paused as Eli fumbled the bipod again. "Shaky hands." The officer gave a terse nod and sighed. "He needs to focus. You being here isn't helping." "I'll move back," Caroline said, "but I won't leave just yet." She took a few more steps back, behind the designated area, but her eyes never left her brother, not when he dropped the rifle again. Not when he looked toward her with eyes full of doubt, the same eyes he had when he was 8 and fell off his bike for the 3rd time. Another recruit laughed from the sidelines. "She probably thinks she can give him pointers or something. Maybe she saw a YouTube tutorial." The laughter rippled among the group, and Caroline heard every word. Still, she said nothing. Not yet. But the wind said something for her. A gust caught her jacket just enough to lift the sleeve on her right arm. That's when a symbol appeared briefly. It was inked in dark grey, a spiral wave wrapped around the alphanumeric code E29V. A nearby instructor caught a glimpse of it and fell silent. Moments later, Commander Luke Reeve, the commanding officer on the field that day, stepped out of the operations tent, reviewing a report. He glanced toward the recruits, then toward the woman at the edge of the barrier, and then he saw it. The tattoo. He stopped mid-stride. His face lost color. Slowly, he walked toward her, each step heavy with disbelief. "Caroline Maddox?" he asked, his voice unusually soft. She turned to face him, calm as ever. "Yes, sir." E29 volts?" She nodded. And in that moment, everything changed. The smirking recruits went quiet. Instructors lowered their binoculars. The field, once alive with shouted commands and barking drills, descended into uneasy stillness. Commander Reeve stared at her like he was seeing a ghost. "You're supposed to be classified." "I still am," she said plainly. "But my brother's here today, so am I." He turned slowly to look at Eli, who was staring at his sister now with a look that blended awe, fear, and something else, recognition, or maybe realization. "You," Reeve whispered, almost reverently. "You were the Overwatch for Silent Vortex. Operation July 2012. 7 hostiles. In the storm." Caroline looked away. That was a long time ago. The commander shook his head, barely containing his emotion. "You saved my entire team. We were trapped in that canyon. Command had written us off. You made those shots in the pouring rain, at night, through fog and wind, 740 meters out." "I made a shot," she corrected. 7 times. But I had a good scope, good weather sense, that's all." "Don't do that," he said, voice firm. "Don't diminish it. What you did wasn't just good, it was impossible." The recruit stared in stunned silence. From the sidelines, the recruit who had mocked her earlier swallowed hard. "Wait, you mean she's the one they wrote about in the after-action reports?" Commander Reeve looked around at the crowd now gathering. "You don't understand. This woman right here saved 6 SEALs when the world thought we were dead. She never took a medal, she never gave an interview. She walked away the moment the mission was over. Someone whispered, "Why?" Caroline answered before the commander could, "Because I never wanted to become something I couldn't come back from." And with that, the first layer of truth was laid bare. But it was only the beginning. For a moment, no one moved. The only sound on the training field was the wind as it rustled through the flags and tents. The same wind that had revealed the truth minutes earlier now, it just whispered, as if urging them all to listen. Commander Reeve slowly stepped forward, his boots crunching against the gravel. He spoke softly, but his words carried like a shout. "Recruits," he said, turning to the young faces frozen in a semicircle. "You've spent weeks learning how to aim, how to calculate distance, how to breathe with discipline. But what you've never learned, what no one here has ever taught you, is that real excellence doesn't shout. It doesn't show off. It just does the job when the job matters most." He turned back toward Caroline. This woman, Caroline Maddox, was codenamed E29V. She was never officially listed in the SEAL database. She operated under temporary deployment, embedded as Overwatch during Operation Silent Vortex in 2012. One of the instructors murmured, "I've heard of that. It was off the books. Deep canyon extraction gone wrong." Reeve nodded. "It wasn't just wrong, it was suicide. We were supposed to be out by sunset. Instead, we were pinned by 2 sniper nests and infantry patrols, elevation on both sides. Our comms were jammed. Weather was hellwind, rain, fog, no satellites, no air support. We had one chance." He pointed at Caroline. She moved 2 kilometers from her assigned post, crossed enemy terrain, scaled a cliff face during a lightning storm, and positioned herself in what military doctrine calls an unviable angle. Caroline shifted uncomfortably but didn't speak. "You know what she did from that position?" Reeve asked, voice rising now. 7 shots, 7 confirmed kills, in conditions where most of us couldn't see our own hands. You know what command said later? They said it was the most difficult series of shots in modern warfare. Silence. Then a whisper from the crowd, "Why isn't she famous?" Caroline finally looked up. "Because I didn't want to be," she said, her tone calm but firm. "Because that mission, it costs something. Every life you take even to save another changes you. I didn't want awards. I wanted peace." Her voice faltered just slightly at the word peace, and it wasn't lost on Eli. He looked at her, standing just a few yards away, his big sister, the one who used to help him tie his shoes, who'd quietly sent him care packages during boot camp, who had never once mentioned a single thing about her past. "You could have told me," Eli said, voice low. "I didn't want you to follow my path," she replied. "I wanted you to earn your own." One of the youngest recruits, barely 19, fresh-faced, stepped forward, his voice cracking. "Ma'am, how did you know where to go? To make those shots?" Caroline hesitated. Then she said, "I studied the terrain. For weeks. Every ridge, every blind spot, every wind corridor. I memorized how the storm moved through that canyon because I knew the weather would change everything. You don't just shoot, you listen, you feel. You learn the environment until it stops being a map and starts becoming an extension of you." Her words sank into the ground like anchors. Reeve took a breath, then turned back to the gathered recruits. After the mission, she refused all medals, refused documentation. She asked for discharge the next morning, packed up, and vanished. No promotion, no parade, not even a footnote. Only one thing she kept. He glanced at her sleeve. That tattoo, E29V, not for glory, for memory. A silence stretched long and heavy across the field. Then the same recruit who had mocked her earlier brash, overconfident, stepped forward. I owe you an apology, ma'am. I didn't know." Caroline gave him a faint nod. "You couldn't have. But remember what you feel right now, the weight of realizing you were wrong. Carry it. Use it. Let it remind you that the world's not always what it looks like." The boy swallowed, then stepped back, visibly humbled. Commander Reeve wasn't finished. "I've seen combat in 3 theaters. I've worked with some of the sharpest operators in the Navy, and I've never seen anyone do what she did that night. That's why we don't assume. That's why we don't dismiss. Because the quietest person in the room may be the one who once saved the entire room." Eli stepped forward now, slowly, cautiously. "Caroline," he said, barely louder than a whisper, "why did you come today?" She looked at him, her eyes soft. "Because you were nervous. Because I know what it feels like to hold a rifle in shaking hands and wonder if you belong here, and because someone once believed in me when I didn't. I came to do the same for you." His breath caught, and in that moment nothing else mattered. Caroline turned her head, gazing back toward the open field, now hushed, the rifles silent, the eyes watching her not with judgment but with respect. She hadn't asked for attention, she'd just come to watch. But in doing so, she reminded them all, greatness doesn't demand recognition, it leaves it in its wake. The recruits didn't return to training that afternoon. No one barked orders, no whistles blew. It was as if time had been suspended, and the dusty field had transformed into something sacred, a living classroom where experience, not rank, was the teacher. Commander Reeves stood with his arms behind his back, eyes scanning the young men and women standing before him. He gestured toward the small wooden bench near the observation area. "Caroline," he said respectfully, "would you be willing to tell them what really happened that night?" Caroline paused. It had been years, and she had buried those memories deep, but maybe it was time someone learned what a mission really costs. She nodded quietly and sat. Reeve remained standing, speaking for her at first. "The 15th of July, 2012. Operation Silent Vortex. My team was sent into the Kafdar Valley, enemy territory deep in mountainous terrain. Intel said we had a clean window 40 minutes in, 20 minutes out, but 10 minutes after insertion, everything unraveled." He paused. No one blinked. The extraction route had been compromised. Enemy scouts had us pinned from both ridges. We were sitting ducks in a kill box. Our comms were jammed. Satellites couldn't see through the weather. Command believed we were lost. Caroline folded her hands. Her voice was quiet when she spoke, but every word landed like a pin drop. "I wasn't supposed to be there. I was air support, backup sniper, temporary attachment. I wasn't on the roster." She looked at Eli, whose breath was caught in his chest. "I'd memorized the terrain for 3 weeks before the mission, and when we lost contact with your brother's unit, I made a choice." She stood slowly, eyes scanning the recruits. "I moved." A single syllable, but the gravity in it silenced the breeze. "I left my assigned post, crossed 1.8 kilometers of forest under enemy patrols, and climbed what we later called the Ghost Ridge, a cliff with no path, no rope, no cover. It shouldn't have been reachable, but I'd studied it every inch of it." A female recruit whispered, "Why that cliff?" "Because it was the only angle where I could see them, all the shooters on the west ridge, the commander with the radio, the lookout feeding enemy intel. The position gave me 7 lines of sight." Another voice asked, "And how did you shoot in that weather?" Caroline's eyes darkened, like she was watching it all unfold again. "I used the rain," she said. "I watched how the droplets curved through the wind, how they bounced off rock. That told me wind direction and force. I adjusted every half second. No laser rangefinders, no assistance, just instinct." Commander Reeve stepped in again. Her first shot took out the radio. No more enemy coordination. Second and third, the snipers. Fourth, the commander. She cleared the ridge like a ghost. 7 shots. 7 lives ended. 6 saved. Caroline looked down at her palms. "I still remember how my fingers shook after the 7th, not from fear, from the weight." One of the instructors finally spoke up, his voice subdued. "I've read about impossible shots in the manuals. They call them myths or lucky miracles, but she made them real." Eli took a step forward. "Why didn't you take the medal? Or stay?" She gave him a faint smile that carried years of ache. "Because when you save lives that way, it's not glory, it's gravity. I didn't want to wear it like a badge. I wanted to carry it quietly like a stone in my pocket, something to remind me of what it cost." There was a long silence. Then the youngest recruit, eyes wide with something like reverence, asked, "Would you do it again?" Caroline didn't hesitate. "Yes, without question. If I knew 6 men were going to die unless I acted, I'd move, even if it broke every rule, even if I was never thanked." Commander Reeve nodded solemnly. "And that's why she's standing here, because doing what's right isn't always written in the manual. Sometimes it's written in the rain." The mood shifted. It wasn't just respect, no, it was reverence. The same recruit who had laughed earlier now spoke again, but this time with a new voice. "Ma'am, what did it feel like being forgotten?" Caroline looked at him straight through him. "I wasn't forgotten. I chose to disappear. Some people want a statue. I just wanted to go home and remember who I was before I became a weapon." And suddenly, The idea of being a hero shifted in the minds of every recruit present. It wasn't about medals. It wasn't about recognition. It was about making the shot and then walking away with grace. She turned to Eli now. You don't have to be me. You don't have to make impossible shots or climb invisible cliffs. You just have to hold steady, breathe, and believe that what you're doing matters. He nodded slowly, his eyes shining. And deep inside, he wasn't just Eli Maddox, the nervous recruit, anymore. He was the brother of E29V. And for the first time in his life, that meant something more than fear. It meant purpose. The air was different now. No longer thick with judgment or dismissal now, it held reverence, and maybe a touch of something deeper, understanding. Caroline didn't linger in the silence she had created. She stepped away from the center of the field, her place now reclaimed not by rank or uniform, but by truth. The moment should have ended there. But it didn't. As she turned to leave, something extraordinary happened. No one spoke, no one gave an order, but slowly, almost reverently, the trainees began moving. One by one, every recruit, every instructor, even the skeptical officers who had told her to wait in the parking lot, formed two lines, a corridor, a silent path. Caroline paused at the edge, startled. Commander Reeve simply nodded. They know. She stepped forward. As she walked between the rows, each person stood tall, hands rising into a salute, not because they were told, but because they wanted to. She didn't return the salute. She didn't need to. This wasn't her victory march. This was their moment to recognize a woman they would have ignored just hours earlier, a woman who had stood quietly, endured mockery, and asked for nothing, and gave everything. Eli walked beside her, his chest a little higher now, his steps firmer. He looked at his sister with a mixture of awe and sorrow. "Sis," he murmured, "that was incredible." Caroline gave him a sideways glance. "No," she said gently. "That was necessary. There's a difference." At the edge of the path, the same recruit who had laughed at her when she first arrived was waiting. He stepped forward, helmet in hand, eyes lowered. "Ma'am," he said, his voice thick, "I learned something today. I'll never forget it." Caroline didn't gloat. She didn't lecture. She asked just one question. "What did you learn?" He swallowed, then lifted his gaze. That heroes don't always look like heroes. Sometimes they look like someone's big sister. She smiled softly. "Remember that lesson. It'll serve you well." And then she left. No medals, no ceremony, just quiet footsteps on gravel as she returned to her car. Eli slid into the passenger seat, still processing everything. As they drove, he kept stealing glances at her arm, the tattoo partially hidden under her sleeve. "Does it hurt?" he finally asked. Caroline raised an eyebrow. "Getting it?" He shook his head, number remembering why you got it. She looked at the road for a long moment, then said quietly, "Sometimes." "Do you regret it?" She didn't answer right away. The hum of the engine filled the silence. "I regret that it was necessary," she said at last, "but I don't regret doing it. Those men went home to their families. That's enough for me." Eli nodded, absorbing every word. 6 months later, when Eli graduated at the top of his SEAL class, he stood before his peers and instructors, decorated and steady, no longer the recruit with shaky hands. In his speech, he didn't mention Caroline by name. He didn't need to. "I've learned," he said, "that true strength isn't about what you can do, it's about what you choose to do when everything depends on you. Some people prove themselves with words, others with silence." Those who had been there that day understood, and they nodded. Over time, stories of Caroline Maddox 29V began to circulate quietly through the ranks. New recruits would whisper about her. Some printed the code E29V on the back pages of their field notebooks, not as a name to glorify, but as a reminder. A reminder that legends walk quietly among us, and that the quietest person in the room might be the reason you're still alive. Months later, a note was posted on the training range bulletin board. Typed, unnamed, but unmistakably written by Commander Reeve. "If someone quiet corrects your aim, don't argue. Listen. They might be the one who protected your back in the dark, while you slept safely in your bed." Years passed, but those who had seen her that day never forgot. Every time a new trainee sneered at a civilian, every time someone mocked the visitor at the edge of the field, someone would step forward with the same quiet correction. Be careful who you ignore. The quiet ones, They've often walked through storms you'll never understand. Caroline never returned to the field. She didn't need to. Her lesson had been planted, and it grew in the silence she left behind. They say greatness needs to be announced. They're wrong. Greatness wears a windbreaker, not a uniform. It stands quietly behind the rope, unnoticed, until the wind lifts a sleeve, and truth speaks louder than any rank ever could. She didn't demand respect. She earned it, in the dark, in the rain, with no witnesses but the men whose lives she saved. She came just to watch. But she left having changed the entire field.